Two households, both alike in dignity in fair Verona where we lay our scene, from ancient grudge to break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life, whose misadventured, piteous overthrows doth with their death bury their parents' strife. The fearful passage of their death-marked love and the continuance of their parents' rage, which but their children's end naught could remove, is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. The width of you with patient ears attend, what here shall miss, our toil shall strive to mend. Hello. In this video, we're going to be talking about William Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet, which is probably one of the most famous plays in the English language, alongside things like Hamlet and Julius Caesar, also by Shakespeare. So, I think part of the reason that Romeo and Juliet is such a famous play is because it is very commonly assigned, or at least it has been historically. I don't know if it's still... There seems to have been a move away from reading Shakespeare in middle schools and high schools, but traditionally this was very commonly assigned in middle schools and high schools. This is one of the plays that many people were quite likely to have read. So you combine that, the fact that people tended to be assigned to read this quite young, the fact that they tended to have to read it for school, which of course makes reading a lot less fun for many people, and the fact that the sort of imagery of Romeo and Juliet is pervasive throughout our culture, and you have a play that people tend to think that they know, but I think often people have a sort of oversimplified conception of what Romeo and Juliet does. Yes, it is a tragic love story about star-crossed lovers, but it's actually also much more than that. It's a story about the limits of political authority. It's a story about the hubris and impetuousness of youth. It's a story about the dangers of holding grudges. It's a story about the perils of having a heavily armed society in which people solve their private grievances with violence, and so on and so on. So I want to start by giving you a sort of plot summary, and then I want to talk about a couple of the elements I find most interesting with this play. There's a lot that could potentially be talked about with this play. I'm not going to talk about everything because I don't have infinite time. But I'm reading this out of the Oxford Shakespeare, Complete Works of Shakespeare, and they actually have a pretty serviceable plot summary in their introduction, so I'm just going to read their plot summary for you. Shakespeare's prologue, which I started this video by reading, neatly sketches the plot of the two star-crossed lovers born of feuding families whose deaths bury their parents' strife, and the formal verse structure of the prologue, a sonnet, is matched by the carefully patterned layout of the action. At the climax of the first scene, Prince Aeschylus stills a brawl between representatives of the houses of Montague, Romeo's family, and Capulet, Juliet's. At the end of Scene 3, of Act 1, Scene 3, he passes judgment on another, more serious brawl, banishing Romeo for killing Juliet's cousin Tybalt, after Tybalt had killed Romeo's friend and the prince's kinsman Mercutio. And at the end of Act 5, the prince presides over the reconciliation of the Montagues and Capulets. Within this framework of public life, Romeo and Juliet act out their brief tragedy. In the first act, they meet and declare their love, in another sonnet. In the second, they arrange to marry in secret. In the third, after Romeo's banishment, they consummate their marriage and part. In the fourth, Juliet drinks a sleeping draught prepared by Friar Lawrence so that she may escape marriage to Paris, and, after waking in the family tomb, run off with Romeo. And in the fifth, after Romeo, believing her to be dead, has taken poison, she stabs herself to death. So that's basically the gist of it. There is this larger political and sociocultural interpersonal conflict between the houses of Capulet and Montague. But basically, Romeo and Juliet meet and instantly fall in love in Act 1. They meet at a ball or party hosted by the Capulets. Romeo and his bros sneak in there in disguise. He sees Juliet dancing, and he immediately forgets about Rosalind, who he spends the first portion of Act 1 being all, woe is me, Rosalind will never love me. I'm never going to be okay. It's basically that for almost the entirety of Act 1. He's a whiny little emo kid, which, to be honest, I don't have that much of a problem with. I like emo kids. But that's basically Act 1. Romeo is sad. Then they go to the ball, and Romeo and Juliet see each other, and they're like, boom, there's my star-crossed love. I'm in love with that person. I don't know who it is, but I'm in love with them, and that's how it's going. In Act 2, Romeo goes to Juliet's orchard below her window. She's all out on her balcony. This is the famous balcony scene, and she's like, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? And he's all like, I love you, let's get married, like tomorrow. And she's like, great, that sounds like a fantastic plan. So they arrange to do that. They get married by Friar Lawrence, who's, I guess, the big religious dude in this community. In Act 3, there's a fight between Romeo and Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, because Tybalt is pissed that Romeo and his friends had crashed their party. So Tybalt basically goes out looking for a fight. Romeo's friend Mercutio, who is Mercurial, as his name suggests, is basically like, yeah, man, I'll fucking fight you. I don't even give a shit. And so they fight. Romeo is trying to stop them because he's now married to Juliet, who's Tybalt's cousin, which Tybalt doesn't know, to be fair. And Tybalt stabs Mercutio, basically going under Romeo's arm. So Mercutio dies. Romeo is pissed. Romeo and Tybalt fight. Romeo kills Tybalt. Then the prince banishes him. Friar Lawrence figures out a way to get Romeo to Mantua, where he's supposed to just sit and wait for instructions. Romeo and Juliet spend the last night together. They consummate their marriage, and then Romeo flees. The Capulets, Mr. Capulet, Daddy Capulet, Big Papa, is like, hey, I know Tybalt was literally just murdered like this morning, but Juliet, you're going to marry this dude Paris on Thursday. And Juliet's like, I don't really want to. And he's like, well, then I will fucking kick you out of this house. So get ready. Juliet goes to Friar Lawrence and is basically like, first off, I'm already married to Romeo, so I can't really marry Paris. You know that. You see that as a problem, right? And he's like, yeah. Second off, I don't want to marry Paris. So Friar Lawrence is like, I will make you this sleeping potion. You will take it. It will look like you're dead. They will put you in your tomb. I will send a letter to Romeo. Romeo will come get you. And Bob's your uncle, happily ever after. What instead happens, and this is toward the end of the play. So that's the plan. Actually, I'll read you the plan, because the plan itself is actually, it's pretty solid. Friar Lawrence here, he's got a noggin on him. So what he says here to Juliet is, hold then, go home, be merry, give consent to marry Paris. Wednesday is tomorrow. Tomorrow night look that thou lie alone. Let not the nurse lie with thee in thy chamber. Take thou this vial, being then in bed, and this distilling liquor drink thou off, when presently thou through all thy veins shall run a cold and drowsy humour, for no pulse shall keep his native progress, but surcease. No warmth, no breath shall testify thou livest. The roses in thy lips and cheeks shall fade to waning ashes, waning. It's from wan, so waning. Thy eyes' windows fall, like death when he shuts up the day of life. Each part deprived of supple government shall, stiff and stark and cold, appear like death. And in this borrowed likeness of shrunk death thou shalt continue 42 hours, and then awake as from a pleasant sleep. Now when the bridegroom in the morning comes to rouse thee from thy bed, there art thou dead. Then, as the manner of our country is, in thy best robes uncovered on the bier, thou shalt be born that same ancient vault, where all the kindred of the Capulets lie. In the meantime, against thou shalt awake, shall Romeo by my letters know our drift, and hither shall he come, and he and I will watch thy waking, and that very night shall Romeo bear thee hence to Mantua, and this shall free thee from this present shame, if no inconstant toy nor womanish fear abate thy valor in the acting it. No unconstant fear or no unconstant toy or womanish fear abated her acting of it, but the plan did not work out quite the way they planned, because, as we learn in Act 5, Scene 2, Friar John gets back, Friar Lawrence's bro, literally bro, Franciscan brother. Friar John could not get the letter sent to Mantua, so Romeo does not know about the whole "this is a sleeping potion, she's going to wake up and be fine" shtick. What Friar Lawrence says basically is like, he had found a traveling companion, another brother of their order, who had been visiting the sick. And when they got to Mantua, the gatekeepers, I guess, of Mantua were like, "Nuh-uh, you were in Plague House. You're not coming in this city. We don't want no plague up in here. Mantua, plague-free, son." So, Friar Lawrence, his message was not sent. Friar John had one job and failed to do it. But a person who did get into Mantua is Balthazar, Romeo's servant. Balthazar does not know the whole Juliet's going to wake up portion of the program. What he does know is that Juliet is dead. He saw her body, saw her being carried to the tomb, and so that is what he reports to Romeo. Romeo, for his part, is like, well, my love is dead. I'm going to go buy some poison from a poor dude who will sell it to me because he's poor. Then I'm going to go back to Verona. I'm going to break into the tomb. I'm going to poison myself next to Juliet. Which is what he proceeds to do. Juliet then wakes up and is like, oh fuck, Romeo's dead. Well, this is a fucking turn of events I did not foresee coming. I'm going to stab myself to death. So she does. Romeo also kills Paris before he does this, so that's a second kinsman of the prince slain. Prince and the Capulets and the Montagues all show up at the end, and the prince is like, fucking make peace. Son, I've had enough of your bullshit. Your stupid feud has cost me 2 of my kinsmen, Mercutio and Paris, and it's cost you both your kids, so shut the fuck up, get over it, shake each other's hands like an adult. Which they do. So, there's a happy ending, I guess. So there's a couple of things, so that's basically what goes on in the play. There's a couple of things that I think are really interesting. One is that, what I guess I think is most interesting is the way that the play sort of foreshadows some of the twists and turns it's going to go through. In Act 2, Scene 1, we've got this interesting bit. Romeo and Juliet, this is the scene where they're talking, this is the balcony scene, right? They're talking, she's up in her balcony, he's down in the orchard. Romeo is trying to convince her that he is really in love with her. And she is skeptical of this because she's not very experienced with men, but she knows that lovers often say things that are not entirely true to try and have sex with the people they want to have sex with. So, what she says here is, "O swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable." He proposes a couple of other things that he could swear by, and then she says, "Well, do not swear. Although I joy in thee, I have no joy of this contract tonight. It is too rash, too unadvised, too sudden, too like the lightning which doth cease to be ere one can say it lightens." So in both of these instances, we have this sense of changeability or variability. The moon shifts, it waxes and wanes over the course of the month. Lightning gives the appearance of creating light, but it's so brief that it doesn't really light anything usefully. And we get this this thematic of change or variability repeated in the next section, the next scene, 2-2, where Friar Lawrence enters with a basket. He's gathering herbs and stuff, and he's a big, medicine dude. He knows how to use herbs, plants, things like this. And he says here, "For naught so vile on the earth does live, but to the earth some special good doth give. Nor aught so good, but strained from that fair use, revolts from true birth, stumbling on abuse. Virtue itself turns vice being misapplied, and vice sometimes by action dignified." And then a little bit later, after Romeo says, "Yeah, I've totally forgotten about Rosalind," Friar Lawrence says, "So soon forsaken young men's love and lies, not truly in their hearts, but in their eyes." And that's an interesting bit in itself. But I think this idea of everything has the potential to be good or bad depending on how it's used and how much of it is used. This is essentially what Friar Lawrence has said here, and I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because one of the things about this play that we get consistently is the negative results of excess, right? Romeo and Juliet love each other to excess, and that ultimately leads to their suicides. There's also the fact that they're teenagers. They make a lot of the fact that Juliet is not yet 14 years old, so her brain is not fully developed. We now know, based on modern neuroscience, the brain really doesn't finish developing until about age 25. So they're not necessarily making great decisions. But love is generally regarded as a good thing, right? Being in love is a pleasant experience. Most people regard that as positive. But if it drives you to suicide, not so good. Similarly, Tybalt and Mercutio are both honorable, brave men, but because they let their honor and their bravery surpass their common sense, their prudence, and their discretion, they both end up dead. And so that's actually ultimately one of the big lessons of this play, is that there's something very Greek about this, right? Something very sort of classically tragic about this, because one of the phrases marked on the door at the oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece was "all things in moderation."